My Seven Chakras, episode 203.
When the future is full of dread and the past is full of regret, where can you take refuge except in the present? When maelstroms of tormenting thoughts push back the barricades of your sanity, the present is the calm center where you can rest. And slowly, as you rest there, niggling thoughts and fears dissolve, like shadows shrinking under the midday sun, until you don't need a refuge anymore. The present is the only place where there is no thought-created pain. The present is the only place.
The seven chakras, swirling vortices of energy, positioned throughout our body from the base of the spine to the crown of the head. For thousands of years, this ancient wisdom has been passed on from master to disciple. What are the functions of these energy centers? And could these chakras help you unlock your destiny and find your true purpose? Welcome to My Seven Chakras. And now, your host, Aditya Jai Kumar.
What's up, Action Tribe? AJ here, founder and host of My Seven Chakras, the show where we dive deep into the ancient world to uncover nuggets of wisdom that will help you find your life's purpose. So if you've recently stumbled upon the spiritual life and you want answers to the burning questions you have, then welcome to the Action Tribe community. And right before getting into this interview, let's listen to a recent iTunes review. The review is by CoolCat2772, who writes, AJ, thank you for all your hard work and dedicating yourself so fully to this work. Both my wife and I love this podcast. Thank you for creating this. Just as they say, the teacher comes along when the student is ready. This came along at the perfect time for both of us and is opening our minds to so many new people, techniques, and concepts. Action Tribe, isn't it amazing when you see a conscious couple getting inspired, learning, studying, and changing the world together? Cool Cat, you are truly amazing. Please send me a message or email and reveal your true name to me. I'd love to connect with you. Action Tribe, since we've completed 200 episodes, I'd really love to connect with our diehard Action Tribe community. So whether it's on Instagram at My7Chakras or email aj@my7chakras.com or by leaving us a review on iTunes, I'd love to hear from you about your experiences so far, why you listen, what are some of the challenges you're facing, and why you do what you do. Because you, my friend, the one listening to this show right now, right this moment, you are the reason why I do what I do. And having said that, let's bring on our special guest for today, Steve Taylor. So Steve, are you ready to inspire?
Definitely. Yeah, I'm ready.
That's superb. So Steve Taylor is a senior lecturer in psychology at Leeds Beckett University and the author of several best-selling books on psychology and spirituality. For the last 4 years, he has been included this year at number 62 in Mind, Body, Spirit magazine's list of the 100 most spiritually influential living people. His books include Waking from Sleep, The Fall, Out of the Darkness, Back to Sanity, and his latest book, The Calm Center, as well as the book that we'll be speaking about, Leap. His books have been published in 19 languages, while his articles and essays have been published in over 40 academic journals, magazines, and newspapers, including Philosophy Now, Tikkun, The Daily Express, the Journal of Humanistic Psychology, and others. He regularly appears in the media in the UK and has recently been featured on BBC Radio 5, BBC Radio Scotland, BBC World TV, and BBC World Service Radio. In fact, Eckhart Tolle has described his work as an important contribution to the shift in consciousness which is happening on our planet at present. Steve's book, The Calm Center, was published through Eckhart's own publishing imprint, and we are now today going to discuss his latest amazing book as well. So I can't wait to start. Steve, thank you so much for joining me today. It's an honor to have you.
Yeah, you're welcome. It's great to be here.
Wonderful. So like always, let's begin with some inspiration, with a dose of inspiration. So let me ask you, what is your favorite inspirational quote and how does that apply to your day-to-day life?
I'm going to read a short poem which I wrote, which appears in my book, The Calm Center. And this is about how when we are in a state of unhappiness and discord, we're usually focused on the future or focused on the past. The future is making us feel anxious, or the past is making us feel bitter or guilty or giving us feelings of regret. So this is about how when we're in that discordant state of mind, we can always transcend the discord by returning our attention to the present moment. So this is something I always do myself. Whenever I find my mind's becoming a bit agitated, whenever I feel stressed, I always bring my attention right back into my present moment experience. So I bring my attention to the things around me. I really focus on my present experience. So this is called the only place. When the future is full of dread and the past is full of regret, where can you take refuge except in the present? When maelstroms of tormenting thoughts push back the barricades of your sanity, the present is the calm center where you can rest. And slowly, as you rest there, niggling thoughts and fears dissolve, like shadows shrinking under the midday sun, until you don't need a refuge anymore. The present is the only place where there is no thought-created pain. The present is the only place.
Wonderful. Thanks for sharing that really, really profound poetry with us. Action Tribe, when we are in discord, we're usually worrying about the future or thinking about the past. And as we are learning today, it's important to come to the present, because the present is your calm center, because that's where you have all the power to take action, the power to change things, and the power to change your mindset. And that's what we're going to dive deeper into today as well. So Steve, to begin with, what is spirituality according to you?
Wow, that's a good question. To me, spirituality isn't so much about religion. Spirituality is about expansion. It's about sensing that it's possible to live in a more expansive and a more intensified state. And it's about using certain practices or certain paths, certain methods or certain lifestyles to move towards that more expansive state. And it's about connection. It's about transcending a sense of separation, a sense of duality, and becoming aware that in our essence, we are part of something much greater than ourselves. And we're part of this vast network of being which fills the whole universe. So spirituality or spiritual awakening is largely about experiencing that connection and becoming aware of your union with the whole universe.
Wonderful. I love that definition. Action Tribe, it's all about expansion, feeling that intensified state and feeling unified to the entire universe, unified to the entire vast network of life. And if you have had that awakened state, then you would be able to relate. But if you haven't, then that's completely fine, because you are on the right track. But Steve, I want to go into your journey. What took you on this quest to write your book? What inspired you?
Well, I always feel when I write a book that it's not really a conscious act. I feel that books grow inside me for a long time, a little bit like being pregnant. But yeah, so I feel that books are inside me. And they can be inside me for 10 years, 15 years, even longer. And slowly they form inside me. And eventually I feel it's the right moment for them to take form. So that was the case with this book. I remember being conscious that I should write this book maybe 10 years ago. But I sensed that it wasn't the right time. I needed to develop in a little bit more. I needed to gain a little bit more information in certain areas.
Right.
But I feel as though in a way it was always inside me right from being a child almost.
Wonderful. I love that thought. I really love that thought. The fact that you have these ideas or this vision for writing the book, and it's sort of in that gestation period, right? Where it takes some time to manifest, where you're getting these nudges and signs, and then one fine day something says to you, or you have that knowing that now's the right time. And I'm sure that's when you sort of took that action to finally unveil that book that so many people were looking for. So thanks for writing it. Now your book is titled The Psychology of Spiritual Awakening. I'm curious, what is the relationship between psychology and spirituality in this case?
Well, in conventional psychology, there's not really much room for spirituality.
Yeah.
So like in Freudian psychology or behavioral psychology, it's quite scientific, quite reductionist. But there is one form of psychology called transpersonal psychology, which investigates the the higher states of being which human beings can experience, higher states of consciousness. And transpersonal psychology investigates psychology from a spiritual point of view, and also spirituality from a psychological point of view. So it's really about, every human being has a spirit, and we all have potential ranges of experience which are sometimes closed off to us. We all know intuitively that, we can be more, we can experience more. We all know that we can expand beyond our present state. So, if you investigate spirituality from a psychological point of view, it means, working out how we can go about expanding ourselves, how we can go about transcending our limitations. And I think it's, you can do that. I think a number of great spiritual teachers were essentially psychologists. Like the Buddha, I think, was probably one of the most astute psychologists in human history. So if you look into Buddhist teachings, it's a very, very kind of fine-tuned, very acute understanding of human functioning, of the human psyche. And if you have that understanding of the human psyche, which the Buddha had, then you can also kind of you can understand how to transcend the present human psyche, how to go beyond our present state. So I think psychology can enable you to do that.
Awesome. So thanks a lot for sharing this. Transpersonal psychology. I didn't really know that this field exists. I was sort of categorizing psychology as a whole, but as you've defined it so wonderfully, it investigates psychology from a spiritual point of view. And like you've so wonderfully and eloquently put, in order to really understand the whole spirituality or the whole umbrella of spirituality, you need to start from the foundation and understand the human psyche, just like the Buddha did. So learning a lot here. Now, in one of your videos, I've heard you mention that a spiritual awakening often happens to someone who is going through an intense psychological turmoil. So what is that? What do you mean by that?
Well, sometimes spiritual awakening is very gradual. When people follow spiritual paths or practices, it can unfold over decades or several years. And some people are just kind of naturally spiritually awakened. When they emerge from childhood into adulthood, they retain the natural wakefulness of children, and their spiritual wakefulness or enlightenment is simply their normal innate state of being. But for many people, spiritual awakening occurs very suddenly and very dramatically, and often that takes place in the context of intense psychological turmoil. So it could be somebody who has been diagnosed with cancer and told that they only have a few months left to live. It could be somebody who has a bereavement, somebody who loses their partner or their child or their close friend. Mm-hmm. Or it could be somebody who is an addict. It could be, a whole range of different situations which give rise to intense turmoil. And usually what happens is that when people feel that they've lost everything, when they are threatened with death, or when, a person who is a major part of their life passes away, so they feel like they've lost everything. They feel like they've hit a kind of rock bottom, as alcoholics or drug addicts sometimes do. The point where they can't go any lower, and their normal identity has been broken down completely. And all of the psychological attachments which normally sustain us have been taken away. And for many people, that situation is simply a breakdown. It's simply a terrible state of psychosis or mental breakdown. But for some people, for maybe a minority of people, when they reach that state of complete loss, they find that a new self is born inside them. So it's almost as if there's a latent, spiritually awakened self somewhere deep down inside them, which was waiting for the opportunity to emerge. And it was only now that their normal self was completely broken down by all of the turmoil and all of the loss they've been through, that this latent self has the opportunity to arise and emerge. So that latent higher self emerges, a bit like the way that a butterfly emerges from a chrysalis, and it becomes their new identity. It becomes their normal self, and they often feel like they're a completely new person. They feel that they are a new person living in the same body, because the shift is so sudden and so extreme.
So, Action Tribe, as we're learning today, there are different states, different types of awakenings. One is if you are in a natural state of awakening. Maybe as a child you had these gifts, you had these sights, and your parents were very open in terms of discussing, and you're exploring your imagination and creativity. Maybe you're in a natural state of awakening, and that you don't have these different numerous thoughts in your mind that some people go through. Or maybe you've taken steps over the years to gradually unfold your awakening and arrive at this point where you're here today. Or sometimes, as we're discussing, it happens suddenly and dramatically. And Steve, I love the way that you shared. In fact, your poetry is being reflected in your words when you said that when they reach that state of loss, that sort of gives them room, right? It gives it room for that latent self, that new self to emerge, that self that was waiting all this while for the right time to emerge, just like a phoenix after that sudden reason for grief, or that loss, or that death that happens, maybe in the family. But that is actually an opportunity, Action Tribe, for a new, latent, powerful state to emerge. And maybe, like you've suggested, that old self might be very different, right, from the new self?
Yeah, completely different. Yeah, a lot of people, as I said, they feel like they're a new person in the same body. And one person told me that she went back to see her family a few weeks after her shift, and she didn't expect them to recognize her because she felt so different. She was surprised that they called her by her name and they knew who she was because she felt so different.
Wow. So we're talking about difference in motivations, maybe difference in vision, difference in feelings and behavior. What are some of the common patterns that you've seen over the years?
Well, a whole range of things. One of the major ones is a shift to a different lifestyle. So people, the most prevalent kind of shift in terms of lifestyle is a shift away from a kind of materialistic, self-seeking lifestyle, a shift away from that towards a more altruistic lifestyle. So people who were like professional, successful professional people, doing well in their careers and who are motivated by money and success, though that fades away. People often have to give up their jobs and take up a new profession. And usually they get involved with therapy, maybe charity, maybe teaching, but they want to do something more altruistic. They want to make a big contribution to people. So somebody explained it in terms of it's no longer about taking, it's about giving. It's about life is no longer about what you can get from the world, it's about what you can give to the world. So that's a major shift. But also a lot of people explained it in terms of appreciation, that they suddenly have this amazing sense of gratitude for all of the small things in life that normally maybe we don't pay attention to. And they have this new sense of gratitude for the people in their lives, for all of the the everyday things like eating, walking, looking at the sky. They felt this amazing sense of appreciation of just being alive, just life in itself. And they no longer took anything for granted. And I think as human beings, one of our biggest issues is that we tend to take things for granted. We take our health for granted. We take the people around us for granted. We take life itself for granted. But when you undergo this shift, then everything becomes precious. Everything becomes valuable. And you no longer take anything for granted.
As I was reading your words and some of the blog posts and videos that you've done, this phrase came to my mind, and this was a poem by William Wordsworth. But what is this life if full of care? We have no time to stand and stare. And it seems like William Wordsworth was highly spiritual awakened.
Yeah.
Wouldn't you agree?
Oh, definitely, yeah. In fact, I talk about him briefly in The Leap, because one of the things I say in the book is that when people are naturally awakened, then they often don't become spiritual teachers or authors. They often become poets or artists or painters. So they live in a state of inspiration. They're so struck by wonder and awe about the world around them that they often turn to art as a means of expressing their sense of wonder. And William Wordsworth was a great example of an awakened person who was also a poet. And there were so many lines in his poetry which could be from spiritual texts. Particularly, I like one of my favorite spiritual texts is the Upanishads, the Indian Upanishads. And there are some lines in William Wordsworth which are very similar to the Upanishads.
Really?
Yeah.
That's beautiful. And the other thing that comes to my mind is no time to stand beneath the boughs and stare as long as sheep or cows. So implied in these words is the respect and the wonder for animals. So he's actually taking the time to get into the consciousness of that particular animal who's just waiting there, and he's comparing himself. So it seems like, that connection to the intricate network of life. It seems like he's experienced that already. So it's so beautiful to revisit a simple poetry like that through the eyes of spirituality. So thanks for providing me that perspective. Now, there are many different spiritual traditions around the world, whether you're talking about Hinduism and Buddhism, or maybe Taoism more in the East. You have the Essenes and Nazarenes in the Middle East, the more mystic traditions, all the Toltec traditions and shamans in Mexico. What is the common thread that sort of binds all these spiritual traditions across the world?
Well, the essential element which they share is an awareness that there is an all-pervading spiritual force which flows through all things. Well, this sounds like William Wordsworth, actually. Flows through all things and fills the spaces between all things. Now, every spiritual tradition has a term for an all-pervading spiritual energy. Sometimes it's called Brahman in the Indian tradition. It could be called the Tao in the Taoist tradition, and often in monotheistic traditions like Christianity or Judaism, the term God is used for this all-pervading spiritual force. So God, if you're a mystic, if you're a Christian mystic or a Jewish mystic, you don't really see God as a personal being who overlooks the world and who makes sure human beings behave properly and so on and can intervene if things go badly. God is a kind of incredibly powerful spiritual energy which fills all things and also which fills our own being, so that essentially we are one with God. And I guess that's the other main recognition of spiritual traditions all around the world. There is the recognition that essentially we are one with the universe and we are one with all things, because the all-pervading spiritual energy which fills the universe also fills our own being. So it's the same energy, and if we enter higher states of consciousness or deep states of meditation, then we gain contact with the essence inside ourselves, with the all-pervading energy as it manifests in us. And we become aware of that connection. The boundaries of our being seem to fade away. And we have this very sort of fluid sense of connection to the whole universe. And so that in a sense, the Christian mystics or the Jewish mystics or the Sufi mystics, they're right in saying that we are God, because, the essence of God is also the essence of our being.
And for that profound reflection, some people were put to death as well.
Yeah, that's
like, how dare you, or God,
yeah,
right?
I mean, there were many Christian mystics, Sufi mystics who, they said things like Meister Eckhart, the Christian mystic, he said, "The eye through which I see God is the same eye through which God sees me."
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah, but obviously the Pope didn't understand that. So back in the 14th century, the Pope didn't understand it. So he summoned Meister Eckhart. Meister Eckhart was excommunicated from the church, and he was due to stand trial, but maybe fortunately he died before he could stand trial. So,
So Steve, my question is: do you believe in life after death? Do you believe in reincarnation?
I certainly believe that this existence in our physical form is not the end, is not the be and end all of existence. I certainly believe that our consciousness is not produced by the brain, and so that when we die, when the brain dies, when the body dies, our consciousness will not die. I think our consciousness will continue in some form. So I'm pretty certain that there is some form of continuation of consciousness, which you could call life after death. But I think it's very difficult for us to kind of envisage what this, what form this will take. I feel very strongly, I have a very strong intuitive feeling that there is some form of life after death. But I don't think we can really comprehend what it may be. It's so different to consciousness or life as we understand it in this form that it's very difficult for us. Maybe we can gain a sense of it, but it's so different that we can't really comprehend it.
Absolutely. And I read somewhere that the Taoists used to refer to these mysteries in the universe, and instead of sort of investigating the root cause of these mysteries, they sort of had this realization that no matter how much we learn, there'll be always something that we don't know in the universe. And I think they refer to this as falling in love with the question.
Oh, right. That's great.
There you go, Action Tribe. You are a physical being that has decided to manifest from the non-physical being, and as soon as this life is over, you will unite with the Tao or Brahman or God or infinite intelligence, whatever you refer to it as. But like we're learning, you will unite with the rest of the living network. So Steve, our listeners are on a journey, a spiritual journey. They've either found that path, they found their awakening, or are very close to finding their purpose and their truth. And my goal is to make that journey a bit easier for them. So could you tell me, on your journey, have you come across any myths or misconceptions that are associated with spiritual awakenings?
Yeah. Well, one of them is that spiritual awakening or enlightenment is unusual or uncommon. So many people think that enlightenment just happens to Indian gurus or Tibetan monks who spend years in monasteries, or people who spend decades meditating, decades following spiritual paths and practices. And many people don't think that, they think that enlightenment is, you'd have to travel the world to find an enlightened person. You have to go to India or go to China or Tibet. But I think that's what I found. I mean, as a psychologist, I've spent 10 years researching spiritual awakening and researching cases of awakening. And I found that it's much more common than most people believe. Especially, we talked earlier about how awakening can occur very suddenly in the midst of psychological turmoil. And that form of awakening is quite common. I've studied many cases of it. And the more cases I study, the more I find, the more people make contact with me to say that they've had this shift. And the thing about it is that a lot of people who undergo this shift don't have a background in spirituality. They've never meditated. They've never followed the teachings of the Buddha or any other spiritual teaching. So they don't really understand what's happened to them. They wouldn't say that they've had a spiritual awakening because they don't know what spiritual awakening is. So it sometimes takes them several years maybe several months or several years to investigate, to stumble upon spiritual teachings. And then they find, oh, wow, yeah, this is what's happened to me. I understand this. And then they have a sort of framework to make sense of what's happened to them. But it's by no means uncommon. Maybe I'll mention another myth which I found, and that's the myth that spiritually awakened people are detached and indifferent to the world. So many people think that if you become enlightened, then you live at the top of a mountain, you go to the desert, you live in a hermitage or in the forest, and you stay away from the ordinary world, and you don't care. You don't care if Donald Trump becomes president of America. You don't care about political problems or social problems. You don't care if there are earthquakes or famines, because you're in this sort of higher enlightened realm where these things are illusory. Right. But that's a myth. I'm sure it applies to some people, but generally, when people become awakened, they develop a strong sense of empathy, a strong sense of compassion, and a strong desire to alleviate other people's suffering. So a lot of spiritually awakened people become kind of social activists, idealists, even political activists. But again, they wouldn't often describe themselves as spiritually awakened people. They wouldn't describe themselves as spiritual teachers. So, I mean, one example I talk about in the book is, you've heard of Florence Nightingale?
Yeah,
famous British lady. Yeah.
She was a nurse, right? I mean, she helped the soldiers.
Yeah, she basically founded the modern profession of nursing. It didn't exist. She founded it. She kind of established the role of a nurse and established principles by which nursing should work. And she also founded a lot of hospitals. She trained thousands of nurses. And she was a social reformer. She reformed sanitation and health. She made many health policies. But a lot of people don't know that she was actually a very spiritually awakened person. She was a kind of mystic. Later in her life, she wrote several books on mysticism. And she was a great example of a spiritually awakened person who has a really powerful desire to alleviate suffering, to a really strong impulse to help the human race. A kind of sense of mission, and a lot of spiritually awakened people have that.
So your definition sort of is very similar to the concept of Bodhisattva, where Bodhisattvas are people who don't leave the community. they take active steps to awaken the spirituality within themselves. And once they see the light, they don't go to a mountain to meditate further, or they don't leave their community. They develop, like you mentioned, a strong sense of empathy and realize that there's a lot of work to be done in the place where they are. And instead of leaving the material world, instead of leaving the people around them in troubles and challenges and stress and worry, they work to change the world around them. They sort of sacrifice and help people get onto that metaphorical raft from the white waters around them and work to change the world. So it's very similar to the concept of Bodhisattva. So thanks for sharing. Now, on the same topic of keeping people safe on their journeys, on your journey, did you notice any insights or any tips on how our listeners can tell the difference between a fraudulent spiritual teacher and a genuinely awakened one? Because with the increasing popularity of the spiritual movement and with the advent of the internet, there are some shady folks coming up who don't have the right intentions, right?
That's true. Well, one of the things I would say is that genuinely spiritually awakened people have no interest in material things. They have no interest in money, and they have no interest in power. And they have no desire to set themselves apart from other people. They tend to be quite humble, and they don't really proclaim themselves as enlightened. They don't sort of set up websites saying, I am the avatar, please follow me and I will take you to enlightenment. They tend to be quite self-effacing. And so I would say that if you know a teacher who is very sort of self-aggrandizing, who proclaims himself or herself as the Messiah, as an avatar, then it's most likely that they are not really spiritually awakened. And if they make a big effort to attract followers, and if they set themselves apart from their followers, if they don't have contact with ordinary people, if there is any kind of hierarchical organization, then it suggests that they are not really awakened.
So there you go, Action Tribe. Keep your eyes and ears open. You're on the right path, but it just makes sense to be safe. So, Steve, what about children? I've heard stories of children being able to see auras. They always tell the truth, as we know. They don't have filters, at least till a certain age. They're able to easily meditate if taught. So, are children naturally awake?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. I think, young children especially have many of the qualities of spiritual wakefulness. And usually by the time we reach maybe 10, 11 or teenage years, these qualities slowly fade away. And so, one of the qualities of awakening is presence. If you're awakened, then you live very powerfully in the present moment. So you don't tend to spend time thinking about the future or the past. You don't spend time daydreaming about alternate realities. Your attention is very strongly focused on your present moment experience. And that's true of children. Children are very present-centered. The future is meaningless to children. The past is meaningless. So they give their whole attention to whatever they're doing and wherever they are. And also, young children have an amazing sense of wonder. They have an amazing, vivid perception of the world around them. So they often spend time staring at tiny things, seemingly ordinary or seemingly mundane things. These things are, they're incredibly interesting and fascinating to them. And unfortunately, that's something that we generally lose as adults, but it's something that we regain when we become spiritually awakened. So it's almost like there's it's a full spiritual awakening is in some ways a full circle. It's we move through the kind of egoic phase of adulthood, the phase of separateness, and the phase in which the world becomes familiar and mundane. We move through that towards a recapturing of the wonder and the presence of the childhood state. But at the same time, I think you can take that parallel too far. There are some ways in which children are enlightened, but there are some ways in which children can be. I know this myself. I've got 3 young children, and I sometimes say that young children are a combination of enlightened beings and narcissistic monsters, because children the children have strong desires, they have strong impulses, and they sometimes get upset or angry when their impulses are kind of frustrated. But I think primarily, children do have these really, really strong qualities of natural wakefulness.
Now, For a moment, let's move away from the personal awakening to a collective awakening. The awakening of communities, cities, countries, and the human race as a whole. So do you see any signs of that happening as on today?
I do. I mean, if you look around the world, things can seem a little bit bleak, especially at the moment. But I think there are some very strong signs that the human race is undergoing a collective awakening. And I think maybe you could say that there are 4 signs of this. The first one is that I think that more and more people are being born in a state of natural wakefulness. So as I said, all children are naturally awake, but most people lose that wakefulness as they become adults. But I think more and more people are retaining that state as they become adults, and they're continuing to live their whole lives in a naturally awakened state. And the second sign, I would say, is that more and more people are having temporary awakening experiences. So these are just sort of, even if it's just for a few seconds, a few minutes, or a few hours, many people have a temporary glimpse of wakefulness. Their state of consciousness changes. They have this experience of meaning and beauty and connection and unity, a temporary awakening experience. So those are becoming more common. And I think it's also becoming more common for people to undergo a sudden shift into awakening, as we described earlier, which is usually in relation to psychological turmoil. And finally, I think more and more people are experiencing an impulse to wake up. So even if people are asleep, even if they're living in a normal, limited state of consciousness, they feel an impulse to expand their awareness, an impulse to escape and transcend their limitations. And that usually leads to an interest in spiritual traditions and an impulse to begin with spiritual practices. But I think that impulse is building up all over the world, and so many more people are buying books about spirituality or learning to meditate and downloading audio meditations. So all over the world, that impulse is building up. So all of these things, they suggest that there is this kind of latent wakefulness within the collective consciousness or the collective unconscious of the human race. And this latent wakefulness seems to be building up momentum, and it's manifesting itself in different ways.
So for someone listening to the show right now who wants to take some action towards an awakening, what is that one action step that you'd like to recommend for our listeners?
I would say quietness. In the modern world, the modern world is such a busy place, and there are all kinds of devices which enable us to take our attention away from the present moment, iPods and mobile phones and computers and everything else. It's so easy for us to live in a state of distraction. It's so easy for us to escape the present moment.
Yes.
So it's really important to make sure that there are periods of quietness in your life. So that a period where you do nothing, where you're inactive, and also where all devices are switched off. When your mobile phone is switched off, your computer's unplugged, and the TV is turned off, the radio is turned off. And it's really important to sort of dive into quietness and to embrace quietness. And when we do that, we find that our own deeper being responds to the quietness. Maybe it may feel uneasy to begin with, because often we're not used to quietness. But once the initial unease fades away, then we begin to have a sense of harmony. Our own being seems to resonate or harmonize with the quietness, and a sense of ease begins to fill us. So I would say make sure that at least once a day you have a period of quietness when everything is turned off, when you are completely inactive, and you can just be in the present moment and just purely experience yourself and purely experience your surroundings in quietness.
So Action Tribe, for the show notes for this episode, you have to visit my7chakras.com/203. That's my7chakras.com/203. Great things are not done by impulse, but by a series of small things brought together. And great things are not accidental, but must certainly be willed. This is an amazing quote by Vincent van Gogh, another awakened person. Action Tribe, intention is the key. Think about it. What is that dominant thought in your mind right now? What is that one goal or that one dream or that one vision that you want to somehow achieve? Is there a certain type of career or venture that you want to pursue? For a moment, forget about whether it's possible or not. Tell your mind to give you a break for a few moments and really think about that vision that you have in your mind right now. No matter how big it is or how impossible it seems at the moment, realize that the very first step towards creating it is actually holding that thought in your intentions, which you're already doing right now. And then the next step is taking small steps consistently towards your goals. You'll face many challenges along the way, but let the vision draw you closer and closer each day until you finally manifest it, until that gestation period gets over and you finally decide to do it. So Steve, we've arrived at the challenge round where our listeners have an opportunity to learn from your struggles and your challenges. So talk to us about a time in your life when you had to go through a major life challenge. How did you get into it? And then what steps did you take to sort of...
Okay. Well, about 10 years ago, it was in 2006, I became seriously ill. I began with I had tonsillitis and I had an abscess called a quinsy on my face and on my neck. But I went to hospital for treatment, and then when I was in hospital, I caught a bacterial infection, one of those superbugs, I think they call them in hospital. So I became very, very ill, and the bug just spread through the whole of my body, and I didn't respond to antibiotics. So I became very weak. I was in a wheelchair. I couldn't eat or drink. And initially, I was very distressed and very upset, as you can imagine. And it was also Christmas time, so I was upset that I wasn't with my kids at home. I wasn't with my wife, and I was missing my family. But after a couple of weeks, even though I felt so physically so terrible, I underwent a kind of shift while I was ill. I accepted the situation. I thought, well, I'm ill. Maybe I'm going to die. Maybe I'm not going to die, but I accept it. I have trust in my situation. I have trust in the universe, and I have trust in the doctors who are looking after me. So I switched from an attitude of resistance to an attitude of acceptance and trust. And suddenly, all of the feelings of depression and discord faded away, and I was filled with this sense of ease and this sense of openness. And I felt absolutely fantastic, even though I was very ill. I felt this amazing sense of lightness and freedom inside myself. I felt incredibly happy. And after a week or so, I started to recover. And I had an operation which helped me to recover. And afterwards, I was in hospital for maybe another 2 or 3 weeks, and I was still very weak for months afterwards, but I was filled this sense of ease and this sense of acceptance, which I developed in hospital, that stayed with me. And also a sense of appreciation stayed with me. After being ill and being, fairly close to death, I felt incredibly appreciative of life. I vowed that I would never take life for granted again. And I vowed that I would put my life to good use after that. And I vowed that I would never complain about anything and never get obsessed about trivial things. And so I think, overcoming that challenge of being ill and overcoming resistance with trust and acceptance and developing that sense of appreciation, that's remained with me ever since.
Well, that's an amazing story that you shared with us. Really quickly, in just one sentence, what is that one life lesson that you'd like to share with our listeners today?
My life lesson is that human life is always filled with some degree of suffering. Now and then, from time to time, we're always going to face difficulties and challenges. But I think the lesson we should learn is that every challenge and every difficulty has a positive undercurrent to it. On the other side of difficulty, there is an opportunity for growth, for deepening, and for transformation. So in a sense, even though we should never consciously cultivate difficulties, we should always welcome them in a sense, because they offer potential for change.
So in fact, Steve, many of our listeners, in fact, all of us are going through some sort of health challenge or the other. And sometimes, depending on how extreme that challenge is, we might experience a moment of hopelessness or a moment that seems very bleak, where chances are very low for us to get better. And I think your story really empowers and inspires those who are going through such a situation. You said that about 10 years ago, you became seriously ill. You had tonsillitis. And to top things up, while you were in hospital, you caught a bacterial infection which sort of spread all over your body. As a result, you became even more weaker. You couldn't really replenish yourself properly. And as a result of being there, you didn't get to spend quality time with your family. And when all things seemed very dark and you were going through this lack of hope, I guess I could put it that way, you went through a phase when you underwent a shift of hopelessness to acceptance, to a moment of trust, and everything will be all right. And things will take care of themselves. As a result, you felt that sense of openness, that connectedness, like we've discussed about in today's show. And that mindset really helped you, because not only did it help you overcome that situation, you were in the hospital, but then your mindset shifted, but also you vowed to put your life to good use and to serve. And so thanks a lot for sharing that story with us, because I'm sure right now many of our listeners are feeling that sense of inspiration and that sense of hope. So thanks for sharing.
You're welcome.
So Action Tribe, I hope you enjoyed today's session, and I hope that the stories shared resonated with you. And like I often say, I may not have met you personally, but somehow I feel I know you. It's like we speak each and every day through the microphone. And I know that many of you are trying to find your life's purpose, maybe finding that state of awakening. Now, I can't tell you exactly what that would feel like, but I can share what helped me on my journey. The first thing I did, paid more attention to my inner feelings, what activities made me happy, what made me elated and excited. In fact, I still remember when I started off, I started journaling my thoughts. If you haven't done that already, I highly encourage you to start. When you start journaling, it's a powerful way to connect with your subconscious mind. The other thing I did was change my focus from me and my journey to how I can serve the world and the people around me. As we're learning today, serving is the ultimate way to getting that state. You see, Action Tribe, when the focus is you feel a level of pressure to perform, a level of anxiety about what's going to happen. You might also get stressed a bit, especially if you're doing public speaking. But when you separate your ego and make the journey about how you can be of service to the world, when you realize that people around the world are waiting for your unique contributions, that mindset is powerful. Because the truth is, like Delatoro McNeil once said, you have a gift inside of you that only you possess. It was meant to benefit the world in some way. So Steve, as on today, what is your life's calling?
My life's calling? My life's calling is to contribute to an awakening of consciousness throughout the whole human race.
And this is a term that I love to talk about during each and every episode, which is the defining moment. Was there ever a defining moment that you went through? Maybe a phrase that you read in a book or an interaction that you had that really changed your life?
Well, there was one book which I read when I was 20 years old. And at that time, I was in a state of confusion and turmoil. I was very depressed. I sometimes thought about committing suicide because I was so depressed and I had so little understanding of my true self. And it was mainly because I didn't know who I was. I'd never had the opportunity to understand myself properly. So I saw myself as a kind of naturally awakened person in retrospect, but I knew nothing about spirituality or spiritual teachings. But when I was 20 years old, I stumbled upon a book called Mysticism by a guy called F.C. Happold. And it was a simple kind of anthology of quotes from mystics and from spiritual texts and little passages of kind of elucidation, which would help us to understand the text. But when I read this book, it was the first book I'd ever read about spirituality. I suddenly thought, wow, this is me. I understand myself. I can see myself. It was like, suddenly I realized that there wasn't something wrong with me. I was I was a spiritual person, and I could understand my innate spirituality. So suddenly I could make sense of myself, and suddenly my confusion evaporated. It was a bit like if you're in a landscape where it's completely filled with fog, you have no idea which direction you're going in. You feel completely lost. But suddenly the fog cleared, and suddenly I knew who I was and where I was going.
Well, thanks a lot for sharing that wonderful moment with us. And with that, we have arrived at the very last round for today, the wisdom round, which comprises of 4 questions that need 4 brief but action-packed answers. So my first question is, what is the best advice that someone's ever given you?
Wow. The best advice which I received was, it was from a Buddhist meditation teacher when I first started to meditate. It was shortly after I read the book I mentioned before and I began to meditate and investigate spiritual traditions. And a Buddhist meditation teacher asked me how my meditation was. And I said, oh, it's terrible because my mind gets really busy. I have so many thoughts going in my mind. And the teacher said, well, what's wrong with that? Just accept your thoughts. Don't think of your thoughts as enemies. Accept your thoughts and don't push them away. Just observe them. And that simple advice to accept rather than try to push away thoughts was very powerful for me.
Name a personal habit that keeps you strong.
Contact with nature. As often as possible, I like to walk in the local park or the countryside, and contact with nature fills me with a sense of serenity and inner peace.
So what is your morning routine like? What do you do during the first 2 hours of your day?
My first 2 hours are very busy because of my young kids. But I begin the day by drinking 3 glasses of water, and that sort of gives me a bit of a boost first thing in the morning. Then I have a bowl of cereal with some fruit. And then if I don't have to rush to my university, I work at a university 2 days a week. But if I have time, I do yoga for 10 minutes, a few 6-7 asanas. Then I sit down to meditate for maybe half an hour to 45 minutes. And after that, that's when I go for my walk in the local park or the countryside. And then I'm ready to return home and begin some writing.
So name a book that you'd like to recommend for Action Tribe today.
I'd like to recommend the Tao Te Ching, which is the famous Taoist spiritual text, which is a wonderfully poetic and esoteric book full of wisdom and profound philosophical and spiritual teachings.
So Action Tribe, I know how much you love our book recommendations, and I know that many of you purchase these books as soon as you hear them shared on our show, and that's why Audible.com is offering Action Tribe one free audiobook download with a free 30-day trial so that you can get to check out their amazing service. Now Audible has over 180,000 titles to choose from for your iPhone, Android or Kindle, including bestsellers like The Chakra System by Anna Dear Judith, Autobiography of a Yogi by Paramahansa Yogananda, and A New Earth by Eckhart Tolle. To download your free audiobook today, go to audibletrial.com/MSC. Once again, that's audibletrial.com/MSC, and you can claim your free audiobook right away. So Steve, thank you so much for joining us today. Thanks a lot for sharing your journey and sharing your wisdom. It was such an amazing experience.
Yeah, thanks very much. It was great to be on the show. I really enjoyed it. Thanks.
Wonderful. So before you go, tell us something that you're grateful for, and tell us how we can find you online.
I'm grateful for life itself because, like most human beings, there have been several occasions in my life when I came close to death. So I'm just grateful to wake up in the mornings and to see the beauty of the world and to experience the energy of my being within my body. And people can find me through my website, which is www.stephenmtaylor.com. So that's Stephen with a V, M for Mark, stephenmtaylor.com.
So Steve, thank you so much for coming on our show, talking to us about the psychology of spiritual awakening and taking us one step closer to a human revolution.
You're welcome. Thanks a lot.
You were listening to My 7 Chakras. Go to mysevenchakras.com. Download your free gift, get inspired, and take action. Transform your life today.